obviously this is also, and this touches on that last topic of mergers and acquisitions. There is always a question with companies coming together about how the owners will interact and getting them to agree. It comes back to the issue we were talking about with the equity market as well, questions of valuations, but also the running of companies after mergers and acquisitions. And like I say, I mean, when you look at the Russian market, and especially some of the, if you like, the more leading edge sectors like retail, does it still look like quite a fragmented market where there should be more in the way of M&A activity and where market shares are often very small for a lot of these companies?
It's definitely still a very fragmented market, and there are many markets which are still fragmented in Russia, foremost in the consumer goods and the consumer services industries, because these are the industries which were born from scratch in the last 20 years. However, the consolidation may be driven in many different ways, and as Chris just suggested, you shall not necessarily buy the company, you can buy the assets, locations, shops, etc., etc. But clearly, in case of the retail, we have two leaders which are taking completely different routes. Magnit is the company which is growing organically out of principle, and probably pretty much on the same premises as Chris described. And then X5 is the acquisitive business, and it's only time will tell which strategy will work out better. But so far, the market attaches higher multiple to Magnit.
What do you think is the impact of having little quality staff in the M&A environment? Do you think there should be more M&A because of it, or less? I mean, one of the biggest problems in growing businesses in Russia is good staff. What do you think that means for M&A activity? Does it mean we should have more M&A or less M&A? I guess it would seem to say you should have more, no?
It's not just staff, though. It's IT systems, it's procedures and things like that. So many of the companies, I don't know much about X5, but X5, in the acquisitions that they've had to determine how to change over those IT systems, how to change over the logistics systems, how to change the people into the way that they do business, or to run them differently. I think that they've got discounters, they've got the convenience store, and they've got the large format. You can run each one of those differently. What you can't do is run your Perekrostok brand. I think they bought Patterson. They merged that in. It has to be run the same way.
And the sector which actually inherently is much more geared towards the M&A growth rather than organic growth is, of course, financial services, because in the broad sense of the word, including the commercial banking, because banking is about relationships, so the easiest way to grow is to acquire stuff. And the Russian banking industry clearly is in the process of rather rapid consolidation. Clearly, the setup of the market with significant decline in the net interest margins actually forces a lot of the smaller banks into the hands of the leaders. And within 3-5 years, we probably will have less than 100 banks.
I mean, I guess there's two ends to the sector, if you like, at the bigger end, and even some of the larger end, the relatively small banks. But among the top 50, obviously VTB itself has been acting as a consolidator with purchases of Transcredit Bank and now potentially Bank of Moscow. There is potential for consolidation there, it seems. But on the other hand, we have this sort of very long tail of hundreds, if not over 1,000 banks, some of which have a very kind of small balance sheet and small, very localized presence. Is there a way for them to consolidate, or is it still going to be a very kind of complicated process, and one which, again, to repeat what you said earlier, may come down to rather than merger and acquisition, just kind of survival of the fittest?
I would say that the banks beyond the top 250 are actually not qualifying for the title of the financial services institution. They are in a somewhat different part of the business, and for that reason they will probably be either continuing with the activities which they're involved in, or eventually they kind of will die out as the demand for those activities is declined. But in a nutshell, and the regulator admits it, that the smaller banks are involved mostly in the all sorts of the regulatory arbitrage, if you wish, types of activities. Yeah.
obviously the central bank has taken steps with this, increasing the minimum capital requirements. Do you think that they're ready to kind of go further and really start to sort of squeeze out some of those?
Oh, for the regulator, clearly it's much easier to have a compact banking system, just to have it more manageable. And it looks like that's the strategy which is being pursued for the last maybe 2-3 years quite consistently.
And I mean, what we're also touching on here is this question of international players and cross-border M&A activity. Obviously, we've seen foreign investors come in, but perhaps what we're seeing now is Russian corporates beginning to think more internationally as well. I guess companies like Severstal perhaps led the way there. But are you, Alexei, are you seeing signs of other among the blue chip Russian companies really starting to think, especially given what's happening in the Eurozone and the US, that companies with stronger balance sheet in Russia have the potential to look outside Russia?
Yeah, actually that trend has been underway for close to a decade now. I would say the first cross-border outbound M&A from Russia, I think, was in 2002, 2003, something like that. And it accelerated very sharply in 2006, 2007, first half 2008. The most aggressive acquisitors actually got into rather difficult situation during the crisis, because a lot of that was driven by debt. At the moment, I would say that there are a lot of growth opportunities inside Russia, and actually, if you think about the businesses which are exposed to the domestic demand, they are still very much Russia focused. Maybe we will see some move into the Ukraine, but otherwise I find it hard believing Magnet buying some retail chain in the United States, frankly speaking. But as far as the commodity business is concerned, yes, these companies perceive themselves as operators of the market, which is inherently globalized. And for that reason, they look at the assets on the global basis, both in terms of the upstream and downstream operations as well as distributions.
Do you anticipate more inward M&A activity as well? Are foreign companies still seeing Russia as an attractive market where there are opportunities, or is it crowded among kind of domestic players? And as Chris mentioned, some of the foreign retail banks recently have been pulling out instead.
Yeah, I mean, I think before the crisis, people were pointing out that the western part of Eastern Europe had 70% foreign capital, and Russia didn't have any to speak of. But of course, that meant all of them were nearly bankrupt when Deutsche Bank, Raiffeisen pulled out the capital. So Russia, in fact, was safer having more homegrown capital. That was quite wise. In terms of the appetite for Russia in general, our optimistic view on Russia is to say, just like Japan was cut from the world for hundreds of years, had served them and wasn't part of international trade. When Americans came in from 1950 to 1980, GDP went in today's dollars from 14 billion to $1 trillion. So there was real growth, 10% per annum for 30 years. Russia could be there if only they get the environment right. Now, do people want to invest in Russia? We just had a phone call from someone who says, I'd like to buy the $40 billion privatizations en bloc. I said, well, that's an interesting phone call. I thought he was nuts, but it turns out there's a consortium that's really interested in making a big investment in Russia, and they want to do it without going through VTB and JP Morgan. They want to do it direct. So there seem to be some people interested, but many people are still scared by as we see the capital outflows, about the uncertainty about the political situation. People are optimistic short term. Looks like there's not going to happen much long term. But somewhere in the middle, if you don't have feedbacks, you don't have local elections for governors, you don't have elections for mayors, there could be an upset, and I think that keeps people outside for now. And also bad taste, simply. I mean, lawyers dying in prison is not helpful, or Lake Baikal, whatever. So, inward, we've seen it. As I said, there's some appetite, but it could be so much better.
So, just to conclude overall, Jochen mentioned that people still fairly optimistic on the long term, but there's a bit of uncertainty hanging over in the medium term. I mean, how do you see the economic situation playing out, and do you think that the elections, while there's a perception of uncertainty there, that actually for economic actors it may not ultimately have that much significance?
The critical word here is uncertainty. It's lingering uncertainty, and as long as it is there, indeed, the real sector prefers to wait for 6 months and then invest with the full understanding of what is the details of the economic policy vector. It's less the political uncertainty, it's more the limited comprehension of the details of the economic policy under the next administration. And even overall direction is more or less well set, kind of it clearly, and we are very optimistic about that. The emphasis of the policy will be shifting from the demand push effort to kind of promote more consumption towards measures focusing on the investment demand, and that's something which Mr. Medvedev was extremely vocal about since the beginning of this year, that this is going to be the priority for the next cycle of Russia's development. With all that in mind, people really need to know what kind of price-setting mechanisms are in the economy and what kind of taxes they are going to be facing, and that's something which is a bit in the limbo given the actions of the past 6 months. So the businesses will prefer to wait another 6 months just to clearly understand what kind of IRRs they are subscribing to.
Well, on that note, I'd like to thank all the panel for what's been a very interesting and wide-ranging discussion. Thank you.